Hello and good evening. I'm Jalen Asher.
I'm Broderick Haywood, and we will be discussing Charlemagne. So who was Charlemagne?
Well, Charlemagne was king of the Franks from 769 until 814. He was crowned king following the death of his father, Pepin the Short, who would establish the Carolingians as the dominant dynasty after usurping the Merovingians, the previous rulers.
Charlemagne would rule most of modern-day France and Germany, and on 800 on Christmas Day, Pope Leo III would crown him Holy Roman Emperor.
Even now, Charlemagne's legacy still endures, and his impact is felt all throughout history. From national identity to literature, the impact of Charlemagne is clearly evident.
So at this part of the video, I'll be talking about the papacy and its relationship with the Frankish kingdom. The papacy at the time was split into papal states, which is different than its own individual country. It was run by the Pope himself. Two popes I will be talking about in particular is Pope Hadrian I and Pope Leo III. These popes would rule in the 8th century. They were important in governing Christendom and other kingdoms, so it'd give them more power elsewhere other than in just Italy and Rome itself. The first pope I want to talk about is Pope Hadrian. Pope Hadrian would rule from 772 till 795 on his death. He would go to Charlemagne out of desperation due to the fact that Desiderius, king of the Lombards, would be attacking Rome while he was pope. Pope Hadrian and Desiderius did not see eye to eye as well because Desiderius knew that Hadrian had overthrown one of his anti-popes. Pope Hadrian would eventually send an envoy to Charlemagne when Charlemagne hears of that his nephews are still alive and they're with Desiderius. Desiderius would threaten to have Hadrian crown one of his nephews, making them the rightful heir and rightful king of the Frankish kingdom, making Charlemagne's rule unworthy anymore. Though Hadrian had sought other allies, Charlemagne was the one to first respond to his request. Charlemagne would help him in taking out King Desiderius and then successfully ruling over the Lombards' kingdoms. Hadrian wanted to have a successful independent papal state society, but this was no longer possible as Charlemagne had taken over the Lombardish kingdom. Thus, this also gives me an idea that Charlemagne wanting to do this was his idea of getting rid of any claimants to his throne, as he got rid of his nephews that Desiderius was holding with him. So now I want to talk about Pope Leo. He would rule from 795 until 816. He would have some interactions with the Frankish kingdom, but more along in 799 at his eventual assault, when he was attending a major litany. Two priests by the name of Campulus and Pascal would assault him by gouging at his eyes and tongue on two different occasions, dragging him out onto the street, next back into the St. Peter's Basilica, leaving him bloodied.
Hey Leo, fancy showing your face around here?
Well, not really. I do live here after all. It is Rome.
Me and some friends want to introduce ourselves.
God be with you, fellas.
Let's get him, gouge out his eyes and tongue!
Wait, what? Oh!
They would capture him, where Albinus, the Chamberlain, would eventually rescue him. For an unknown amount of time, he was held there for a while, we can assume. The Duke of Spoleto, however, would hear of the news that he had been recovered from his injuries. Leo would say himself that God had restored his eyes and tongue, eventually after whatever happened to him. So, Charlemagne hears of this too and sends his son to go retrieve the Pope, taking him to his favorite court, Aachen, where Pope Leo would tell Charlemagne of this news, and Charlemagne would eventually keep him into his court for some time, returning the Pope to St. Peter's, assuming it was safe there now to return him. Now, Pope Leo had to do an oath of purgation, to say that he had committed no crimes against the church whatsoever, that the priest had said that he had committed when he was assaulted. So, during this Pope's oath, it was deemed that it was meant to keep him ordained and belittle him because of this. But I figured that it doesn't seem that it was supposed to be that way. Because if you're a pope, you want to seem powerful. You want to be restored, renewed, like, I'm fine. But instead, other versions of this writing seem to be written from perspectives of third person, though a Vatican version is written of somebody who accounts for personally knowing Pope Leo and talks fondly of him, saying that he knew him from the Patriarchate where Pope Leo had first began when he was striving to become Pope. As you can imagine, this changes monasticism in the Carolingian Empire, as just 2 days after the purgation of Pope Leo, Charlemagne is crowned Holy Roman Emperor. This gives both Charlemagne and Pope Leo power. So I find it kind of strange how all these events kind of mash together so well. Pope Leo's eyes and tongue are restored to him, and in such, he is restored to power in Rome, and this gives him the right to crown Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor. And Charlemagne assisting Pope Leo gives him more power because, well, he's now Holy Roman Emperor. He gives control in the Papal States, and the Papal States now have more control in the Frankish kingdom. They seem to mesh very well together. And I also find it strange that in the events of the assault of Pope Leo, it's not exactly described what crimes he had committed against the church until the very end of his own biography. It leaves a lot of more questions than answers, but as history tells, we know that this had happened, but we don't know exactly how. Other scholars seem to speculate on this information as well, seeing that Pope Leo and Charlemagne's alliance with one another seem to be intertwined. Maybe not from the start of when Pope Leo's assault was, but more towards when Pope Leo was brought to Aachen. We know this for sure from Einhardt's writings that Pope Leo was there in that court for some time. We don't know for how long, but he was restored to power as Pope eventually. This gave Pope Leo power as Pope once again, thus giving him power in the Frankish kingdom. And him making Charlemagne Holy Roman Emperor gave Charlemagne more power over the Papal States. Monasticism in the Frankish kingdom would change as the Frankish kingdom's Christian church became a part of Pope Leo's rule. This would expand Christendom.
Oh, King Charles!
What is it, Pope Leo?
You won't believe what those wicked priests Pascal and Campulus did to me!
What have they done to you?
They kicked me out of Rome, they gouged out my eyes and cut off my tongue. But by the grace of God, thankfully, I was restored. So I need you to come back to Rome with me and restore my power as Pope.
I will do this for you, Pope Leo.
You would?
We will ride to St. Peter's. Come, follow me.
You truly are a friend of God. Let's go.
My dear friend Leo, what has happened to you?
Hello, good King Charles. Yes, I was attacked by the two wicked priests, Pascal and Campulus. They gouged out my eyes and cut out my tongue.
Your eyes and your tongue.
Aye. But by the grace of God, I was restored.
The men that have done this to you will pay. We ride to St. Peter's at once.
You would do that for me.
Of course, my friend.
Let God witness our deeds. Let's go. This is all your fault, Campulus.
This is your fault, Pascal!
My fault is your mother's fault for birthing you!
You wanted to—
Silence! You've committed crimes against the church. What say you?
I regret none of my actions. Leo has committed sins.
I say this is all his fault and I should have never trusted you to begin with.
I hereby exile you both. If I see your faces in my kingdom again, I will slay you. Now leave my palace at once.
Charlemagne, huh? What a guy, right? In my section of the video, I will be discussing how Charlemagne was the start of a dominant power in the western half of Europe following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. So Charlemagne was deemed Emperor, Caesar, and Augustus by the papacy in Rome. This is of note because these titles are Western Roman in style, not even as Western Roman, but Roman. And the cool thing here is the Byzantines still exist, and they are the continuation of the Roman Empire. This is also not the first time the papacy harkens back to a Carolingian-Roman relationship. In the Codex Carolinus, there's letters addressed to Pepin, calling him patrician of the Romans. which is cool because patricians are or the noble families of Rome. So it's kind of showing a Carolinian-Roman connection of sorts. So gaining the title of emperor was a really huge step in solidifying Charlemagne's power. However, there was the Byzantine Empire, as I mentioned previously, in the east, who also had the title of emperor, so there was points of contention. Now, let's talk money. On Charlemagne's coinage, he portrays himself in an imperial aesthetic of sorts. He has the laurel crown the old Western Roman emperors wore. He has a loose robe-like garment, kind of like a toga of sorts. He's facing profile, showing that handsome Frankish Charles face. And his name is written in Latin. However, instead of the hard C that's traditionally used in Latin, the K is there, showing a Germanic influence, so it reads Carolus with a K. The coin was minted in Mainz, I believe it was. Now, compared to a Byzantine coin of Emperor Theodosius I, same thing. Guy is facing profile, has a crown around his head, wearing the loose robe-like garment, and his name is written in Latin, Theodosius. So the comparison to be made here is these are both portraying the leaders in an imperial, regal sort of manner. So the lowest of peasant and the most foreign merchant could pick up these coins and be like, hey, this is the big guy, this is the emperor. This is his coin, it's official. Now nostalgia sure is a heck of a thing, isn't it? You ever hear talk about how things were better before you were born? How the good old days were just that, good and old? Well, this isn't exactly a modern sentiment, and it's kind of echoed in the 9th century by historian Nithard. See, Nithard is living shortly after the crowning of Charlemagne as emperor, as a teenager, of course. So, he's kind of like the 90s kid of back then, He didn't live through it that long, but he has fond, nostalgic, rose-tinted memories of it. He's writing in the time of King Louis. He's in his court. So to be fair to Nithard and his rose-tinted goggles, he was living in a pretty turbulent time. Louis' sons were fighting amongst each other, and, comparing it to Charlemagne's reign, it makes Charlemagne look a whole lot better. And I get where he was coming from, I guess. Nithard writes in one of his histories, "In the times of Charles the Great of good memory, who died almost 30 years ago, peace and concord ruled everywhere because our people were treating the one proper way, the way of common welfare, and thus, the way of God. But now, since each goes his separate way, dissension and struggle abound. Once, there was abundance and happiness everywhere. Now, everywhere there is want and sadness." This pretty melodramatic writing paints the time Nithard is living in as one full of misery and dread. It kind of shows how Charlemagne was a model emperor too, because someone like only a generation later is already looking back on Charlemagne like, wow, that was the good old days, man. So Theophanes was a Byzantine chronicler, writing of many, many events, namely the Iconoclast movement during the reign of Emperor Leo III. The Iconoclast movement, in my opinion, is the beginning of the end for positive Byzantine papal relationships. It shows a kind of souring of the former alliance that was so steadfast. So the papacy, they kind of needed a new friend. Because the Byzantines were going around smashing icons and saying that all these gaudy images of Jesus and all that's bad news. So the papacy's like, oh man, we need a new ally to turn to in our time of need. So the biggest power at the time that was in the Byzantine Empire, the Franks, and modern-day Francia. My Basilius! My Basilius! Oh!
Alexandrios, what is this brashness?
Forgive me, my Basilius, but I bear some disturbing news regarding your courtier, Flavius.
Flavius? The officer's brother?
Yes.
Well, what is it?
Well, as I said, my Basilius, disturbing news. Flavius is an idolatrous worshipper of icons!
Ah! A graven image of my Lord Jesus Christ. Guard, seize Flavius from his chambers. He'll be sleeping in the dungeon from now on. And as for you, Alexandrios.
Yes, my Basilius?
Fetch the parchment and write down as I say. I have a message to relay.
Yeah, immediately, my Basilius.
Attention all citizens of the Empire. This is a decree from your Emperor Leo III. I thought it was absolutely and perfectly clear that there was to be no worship or praise given to icons. If there's one thing the Arabs got right, it was their disdain for graven images and icons. If I hear of any of you possessing an icon, I will smash it to pieces personally. Do not listen to those foolish Westerners, for they are ignorant of the faith and are actively disrespecting their emperor, and I would smash them to pieces too if I had the chance. Remember, no icons. Remember, I'm watching.